Hi everyone, this is Sean Ismail from the Cloud Ranger, and you're viewing the Microsoft Azure training. Today is the part 3 of the Azure Virtual Machines, and we're going to talk about creating Azure VMs with PowerShell. So this is going to be a continuation of our previous session where we created virtual machines from the UI or from the management portal. And today we are going to do the same things we did in the last session, but using PowerShell. And this is important not only for the exam point of view, this is also important if you try to script things in your production or in your lab environment. You don't want to go through the UI every time to go through all the steps to create a virtual machine. So you want to script things out. And it could be, scripts could be chained like in PowerShell, and you could probably have an entire deployment in Azure with a bunch of virtual machines and a lot of things. Anyway, so we're going to go to the basics of creating the Azure VMs with PowerShell. So what's on our agenda today? We are going to first do quick create a virtual machine with PowerShell. Then we'll create a virtual machine from the gallery with the images provided. And we're going to attach a data disk to an existing virtual machine. So a data disk like for 20 gigs, 30 gigs of data disk. And we did similar things last time using the UI. Then I'm going to create a virtual machine using PowerShell with an existing OS disk. So we are not going to create a disk. We're going to just use an existing one to do that. And then I promised when we were doing the networking sessions that I ran a lot of scripts, and I said that, don't worry about what I'm doing, but just the parts of the script that are required for the networking components, really. So I'm going to go not through the script, but I'm going to show the configuration that I did back then. So now it will make more sense now that we are creating everything with PowerShell. Okay, so that's all the thing we have here. We are not going to use the UI too much except for showing that what we created, but most of the things are going to be done through scripts and through PowerShell for this session. And it's absolutely important that we pay enough attention to see what we are doing, because a lot of things from the UI is done actually in the background. So when you are doing this in PowerShell, nothing is done for you automatically. Well, not a whole lot is done for you automatically. So you'll have to go through the scripts, the commandlets to actually do everything to get to that point. And for me, PowerShell scripts are pretty good in understanding a concept because I can actually visualize better than all the steps that are taken to do something. So for some of you, this might be quite interesting. Okay, so let's go to our client machine and get started. Okay, so here I'm at my client machine. I'm in my subscription. Go to all items. As you can see, there's really nothing there besides the default directory. My virtual machines show 0. My storage shows 0. There's no cloud service either. So let's go ahead and quick create a virtual machine. So basically in UI, what you would do is actually, let's go from here, virtual machines, create a virtual machine. The step that I'm talking about is actually the quick create a virtual machine we did in previous session. So we know that what we basically need is a cloud service name or the DNS name here. We definitely need to have an image. So the Windows Server 2012 R2 data center is the family of image. We're going to have a size. So over here, we will be using the standard images over here in PowerShell rather than A0, A1, A2 to A4. They actually use the extra small, medium, and large. So the naming is a little different from A0 to A4. And then we have, since this is going to be a standalone virtual machine, we'll have a virtual machine specific configuration. So we'll be putting the username and password to log into the RDP. And the location or the region over here, I'm not going to go over the affinity groups. So the region or the location is basically going to be East US 2. That's the one we are going to use. Okay, so let's get started from PowerShell. So I'm going to use the PowerShell ISE because that's where it's easy to run the script from. Let's go over the script. So the first one is quick create an Azure VM. The stuff that we need here is that we need a cloud service name. So I'm going to call it Ranger VM 001. And the cloud service we know needs to be located in a location or region. For me, it's East US 2. If you are from a different location or region, go ahead and pick the one you need to, right? And in my previous video, I showed you how to get that information to put in the PowerShell. The size is small. So what is a small actually, right? I mean, it's a standard name. When PowerShell really, Azure Cloud really came out, they used to have different naming convention and they used to have extra small, large. So there is a location here this is the URL where it's actually the virtual machine clouds and cloud services sizes for Azure I went through in the last session. So if you scroll down here, you can see in standard, you have various sizes. So from A0 to A4, which are 5 of them, you have extra small. This is A0 actually. This is A1, A2, A3, A4. So we are using small, which is 1 core and 1.75 gigs of memory. This is similar as saying A1, but and you can see after A4, which is extra large, it actually goes to A5. So it doesn't really call A4. So only in UI, you'll be seeing this called as A0, A1, A2, and A3. But for PowerShell, we have to make sure that we put the size from there. So I said small. Now we are going to have the virtual machine name. The virtual machine name is Ranger VM001. I'm keeping the same name as the virtual machine with the cloud service name for just our convenience. Image family. The image family is basically Windows Server 2012 R2 Data Center. For me, it is R2 2012 R2 Data Center. You can pick up all the images names from here. These are all the images that you can pick up, and there are more. If you just wandered into this video, please go to the previous session. It's a continuation. So I actually show you the PowerShell commands to actually go get the actual sizes, image instance sizes, and the names, okay? And this is important. This is actually the cmdlet get Azure VM image, and I run this entire routine here to actually bring the latest build. So what I'm saying is that go through the image family, Windows Server 2012 R2 Data Center, go through the published date, sort it, and the first one is going to be the latest build version. You need to do this in all your scripts because you obviously need to choose the script you want. For our example, we are using Windows Server 2012 R2 Data Center. Then comes the configuration for the virtual machine. It's a standalone virtual machine, so the RDP will require a username and password. So for me, the password is Sean and the standard Microsoft demo passwords. So it's a complex password. So that's what I'm doing over there. Now, the next thing I have not gone through, the next couple of steps I've not gone through before. So I'm going to explain this a little bit in details. So as you can see, I briefly touched this in my last session, was that you can create a storage account and store all your VHDs in there because your virtual machine needs storage to store the disk. You know, on premises, this would be your SAN or your local storage, or it will be direct attached to storage, a DAS or whatever. So for that, you need to create a storage account, and the VHDs folder will be created there for you as a container where you go and put the VHDs. Okay. We have really never come in here to create a storage account because when you create a virtual machine directly, let it be a quick create or from the gallery, it usually your subscription finds out that, hey, you know what, he's missing a storage account, so we'll create a random storage account and store everything in there. So we have never really come and created one explicitly ourselves. And like, you know, some sessions where we have to introduce we introduced concept. I mean, I keep doing that because, you know, I'm not going to go into a concept so much, but there'll be separate sessions there. So this is one of those. I will have a bunch of sessions where we go through the entire storage account and storage in Azure. But for now, all we have to remember is that you need a storage account where you can store virtual machines. Now, this is done for you in the UI in the background. Obviously, in PowerShell, it's not done for us. So we have to create one. So the stored name is basically the storage account name, and my storage account name is going to be Ranger Store 123. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a new storage account using this cmdlet, new Azure storage account, and I'm putting this storage name in the parameter here, and I'm going to put it in a location. This location is going to be the same location where the cloud service was created. So I'm going to create this, I'm going to pretty much have location variable always point to east US2 in my all scripts, because your storage and your cloud service, they technically cannot be, in ideal circumstances, cannot be in two separate locations. Obviously, there are geo applications. There's a lot of other things that will happen, but I'll explain them to you when we go through the storage sessions. But for now, we are first going to create a storage account. And once we created the storage account, we are going to select our subscription. We get Azure subscription and subscription name. In our subscription, we are going to set the current storage or the storage account we just created as the default storage account. It's important that the storage account you create is targeted or selected as the default storage account for the subscription. So all my scripts are going to have this couple of lines there to create the storage account and attach it to the subscription. Now, if you have gone through MSDN or other blog posts on the internet somewhere, you'll see that a lot of people do not have this uh, do not have these lines there, because once you have, and this is the only explanation I could find, is that once you have selected and assigned a default storage account, all the other scripts that you are going to run do not need that, because it will find out that you already have a default storage account selected as the storage account for the subscription. But I wanted to make sure that you don't run into an error, and I wanted to make sure all the scripts were self-contained. That's why I will always have this in all my scripts. If you pick up some of the scripts from MSDN or anywhere else and it's not there, there might be a time where there might be some weird error. And the reason behind that weird error is because you do not have a storage account selected as the default storage account for the subscription. All you have to do is put those lines there, make sure that you create it, and you do that. I have gone, painstakingly, I had to go through all the scripts to figure out what the problem is, and that's the problem I could find. Okay. So far so good. This is nothing different from filling up that little form that we had, or when we create the virtual machine and we did the quick create. We are basically filling this information up with that right now. The actual quick create or the quick VM creation is only one commandlet. It's the New-AzureQuickVM. You need to remember this. With New-AzureQuickVM, you are just quickly creating a virtual machine. It's a Windows virtual machine. It's a standalone, not a Linux, not a domain. It's a standalone Windows. This is the service name. We can pick it up from here. The name over here is actually the virtual machine name. It comes from here, VM name. The image name that we selected here, the image name. Admin user and password. This is the standalone credentials to get in. We need to put the location. This is again going to be the same location that we came from, East US 2. So we are keeping this same for all the commandlets. And the instance size. So this is going to be the size small. Okay, that's all there is to quick create a virtual machine. It's pretty simple if you remember these steps properly. And you know what? Do not bother copying this or taking screenshots of this. On my blog post, I will have a location where I'm going to put in the scripts that you can download. And obviously, you have to modify a bunch of stuff over here, however you want it. So you can just download the script and change it and pretty much run it. So don't bother writing this down or copying it. It will be there for you for download. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this script and quick create a virtual machine. So I'm going to click on this. As you can see, it's not really very verbose. Means if you look over here, it does not tell you what is going on right now with this script. On the UI, it actually tells you that creating something, doing something. It's just not going to happen over here because in PowerShell, it's asynchronous. So those information are missing. But if you viewed my video from the networking sessions, I actually had the script a little bit more beautiful or a little bit more elegant. So I would actually have some statements here to display showing that when the storage account was being created, when was the subscription attached with the default one, when the virtual machine was created. So in your production, you want to put a couple of lines in here just for display or logging to show at what point of script you are in. So that's something that will be important for you in production to keep a tab on things. But besides that, there's not a whole lot you can see from there. It will show up in UI a bit when the things are actually being created. So I'll pause the video when it shows up to show you what I really mean. But otherwise, you can only just see that the script is running, but you do not see anything over here. Okay, so let me come back. I just had to unpause here to show you something. As you can see, nothing is being shown here, but I kept refreshing my all items here. You can see in the back end, it's actually trying to create my storage account, resolving DNS and doing some things. So some stuff will show up here. You can see a little bit of a display came through that a new storage account was created. It succeeded. It's now trying to create the New-AzureQuickVM. It's running that commandlet. These are actually the default verbosity that's coming out of the commandlets itself. I've not put in any command here or any commandlets here to actually display anything. But if you go back, you can refresh this. Sometimes I found out that you might have to press F5 or create the hit the little refresh over here to see what's going on in the back end. But once again, this is creating a virtual machine, so it's a waiting game. We just have to wait it out till everything is created. So I'll unpause in between a little bit to show the separate steps that are happening while this happens. But otherwise, we just have to wait. As you can see, a lot after refreshing, a lot more populated here. So the cloud storage was created, but the Ranger VM 001 was created, and now it is starting. But besides that, as far as the script is concerned, it's completed. Now, this is the weird part, right? The script is completed. It does not wait for the whole thing to happen, then complete. So looking at this, it does not necessarily mean everything is up and running. You have to come over here, refresh all items or refresh the browser and see what's happening. So I'll be back when the VM is created. Okay, it took a while, but our virtual machine was created, and that's really it. If we go to the virtual machine here, we can see that it went and picked everything for us. The VIP, the DIP, it's a standard A1, the small size, 1 core and 1.75 gigs of memory. The thing that I wanted to show you here was that that's all really we had done to create that virtual machine, New-AzureQuickVM. And like the quick create of the virtual machine, it does not really ask for anything. But if you go and see the endpoints like the PowerShell and the RDP, it's already been assigned for us. So that's all there is to creating a new quick VM. In all the subsequent scripts that we are going to run, this part is always going to be the same. We are always going to make sure that we have some information here and we pick up the right image. We put the admin user and password. Like I mentioned earlier, that this needs to be in all the scripts. I want this to be in all our scripts, just so making sure that if you're running this script by itself, it always has the information it needs and it's not going to sort of break on you. But for the new Azure QuickVM, that's the only commandlet you need to know to run this. Okay, so now let's move to the next step, and I'm going to go and clean up my subscription here before I actually go to the next step. So in the next step, what we're going to do is we are going to go and create a virtual machine using the images that are available for us. Obviously, it will provide us more information. We'll have to provide more information in the script to create that virtual machine. It's going to be similar to, let's go to virtual machine, go to new, the from gallery part. Remember this site? We have always been creating the virtual machine this way because you obviously have more control on how the configuration is going to be done. And in production, most likely this is how you'll be creating your virtual machine, because this is also the only step you can choose the networking and stuff like that. And I'm going to do that in the next script. So be right back after I have cleaned my subscription here and make sure all these are deleted. Okay, be right back. Okay, I've cleaned up everything in my subscription. As you can see, there's nothing in here, just default directory. This is just to show you everything from scratch. Okay, so the next script we're going to tackle here is create Azure VM from images. So this is what we have been doing when we go to the UI and go to the gallery. So up to this part is the same. We have the cloud service name, we have the size. I'm actually using medium here rather than the small. So it's a little bit, it's a larger VM than the one we have been using for the small one. The VM name is going to be the same, admin and user password. The store name we are creating over here, new Azure account storage. So this is same from the previous script up to this point. Here, we're going to introduce something called this new Azure VM config. I will explain why this part is all commented out, but let's start from this one. So I am in this way of creating the virtual machine. What you first do is you sort of build up the script to have all the configurations in a variable. Then what we are going to do, the actual VM is going to be created with New-AzureVM. So the previous one that we used was New-AzureQuickVM. This one is New-AzureVM. And we are going to take this entire configuration and just push it into this commandlet with the -vms parameter here, the switch. So what does this New-AzureVM config do? Well, this is actually one command, okay? One commandlet. I am just, using the pipe here to sort of make it one large statement to just make things easier. And I'll explain all the different ways that we can actually do this. But for now, let's just go with this one. So what we are doing here is that with the new Azure VM config, we are creating a local configuration object and we are piping it to the other Azure commandlets. So these multiple commandlets are actually all being piped to the new Azure VM config. The new VM Azure config takes a lot of parameters. So the first one is the name, which is the virtual machine name, the instance size, and the image name. So this is the minimum you need for the configuration of a virtual machine: the name, the size, and the image name. Everything after this is actually optional, but you'll see that some of them you probably need right away. The add Azure provisioning config, you need that to actually ensure that this is a Windows standalone box and this is the admin username and the password for the RDP session that you'll need. So these are the two actually you can say that are absolutely needed to ensure that your virtual machine is up and running. After that, the reason I added the Azure endpoint commandlet here is because I'm actually creating a new endpoint. If you remember from my the last script, you saw or when we created this in the UI, you noticed actually that the PowerShell and the RDP ports 3389 and all that were already there for you. So I just want to show you that these are the things, the power of the PowerShell. These are the things you can actually already put in the in your script to create something or to add something while the virtual machine is created. So I'm creating an Azure endpoint for HTTP protocol. It's a TCP protocol with port 80 for public and the local, and we are going to pipe that all into the VM config, Azure VM config. Okay, so just for that. Now the next statement over here, I'm going to actually just comment this for a specific reason. What you can also do is you can create add Azure data disk. So with this commandlet, you can create a data disk and attach that with your virtual machine while you're creating the virtual machine. So this is amazing. If you're doing a lot of deployment as a consultant or in your company, anywhere where you can have this script already put everything in there because you already know that I'll need one data disk or two data disks and they need to be in there while I'm creating this virtual machine so I don't have to go and do this later. Okay, so I just commented this because I want to show you this in a different way, but you can have all this information provided to the new Azure VM config, which is basically the configuration for your entire virtual machine. After this is done, you create the virtual machine. New Azure VM service name. You have to put the service name and location at this point. You do not put that in your virtual machine configuration. And you take this entire configuration that you just created and use the dash VMs and you pass this as a parameter to this switch. So the virtual machine is created with this entire configuration. That's all there is to it. This is similar to going to the UI and creating from the gallery, adding in all this information. Now, I like this way of doing it, having multiple commandlets piping to and feeding to the new Azure VM config. There are other ways to do this, and I'm doing this over here. The first one is basically the same thing over here, except that we are stopping at this point because we are saying that that's all we really need. We don't want to put the Azure endpoints. We do not want to put the additional disks. So this is one way of doing it. You could get away with the first one. In the second one, it is still the same, new Azure VM config. It's just a different way of writing it. So we are stopping at this image name. So rather than piping it, if you are already an expert or familiar with PowerShell, you know that all you have to do is take this entire configuration in a separate line and then pipe that other commandlet in here and store it again or on a different variable. You could do the same way too, right? I mean, you can take this, then take this VM1 config and pass it to the new Azure VM config over here, and you'll be good to go. It's just we have written this in a different way. The other way to do this is also the first line is going to be the same. You have up to the image name. The second line is going to be similar to this guy. But here, you are going to have the add Azure provisioning config. The provisioning config commandlet will be here, and this time it will have a switch -VM where it will take this entire configuration. This is similar to the new Azure VM commandlet, but you have to remember this one is VMS, and over here it's just VM. and it takes the entire configuration and puts the admin username and password. Oh, and by the way, the add Azure provisioning config, it's how it provisions. It's the additional provisioning information that goes to a VM. What this specifies is that if this is going to be a Windows VM, or it's going to be a Linux VM, or it's a Windows VM on the domain. So we'll go through some of these configurations later and add more things. But this is the basic one, a standalone virtual machine for this. That's what the add Azure provisioning config can do. So rather than piping it, you can actually pass the VM config as a parameter using the /VM switch. I prefer this because I like this to be one single line and one commandlet where it pipes the other ones, and it's easy for me to see this way as well. If you have a long script, it's easy for me to see each line what it is taking rather than being all over the place. However, for exam point of view, you could have questions that could pretty much take any one of these ways of doing it. So do not be alarmed or confused. They are all doing the same thing. It's all about your preference of how you do it in PowerShell. That's all really. Okay, so if we run this script right now, it will create us a VM with all this information that we have provided. It's similar to QuickVM, but obviously you can see you can put in more information here as well. And the last thing I want to mention before I run this is that if you viewed my networking sessions, this is actually the point where we would put in the information for the static virtual IPs, the static, the dips and the pips. So if you want to put a static IP address to the internal IP address to the virtual machine, you'll actually pretty much do it in the configuration. I will show you some scripts or part of scripts, or this will now start making sense if you go back to the networking and you can see that this was the point where we started putting in all the configurations together so we can pretty much push it, shove it to the new Azure VM commandlet. So let's go ahead and run this command, and similar to the previous one, there is not going to be a whole lot of verbosity, but we'll be able to refresh every now and then, and we'll be able to see what the script is doing. I have commented this out over here, and I have commented this part as well. I'll explain in a little bit what this will do. But besides that, it's just creating a regular virtual machine. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the virtual machine. I just want to make sure the name is right. Okay, let's go ahead and run it. And I'm going to let this run and come back in between when something shows up or when the virtual machine is being created. Okay, be right back. As you can see, the script has ended over here, and just like the previous times, it's actually still creating everything in the back end. So there's no way to see through the script or the way the script runs how everything is running. So I'm going to just refresh this to see what else is going on, because it just does not refresh it well. Let's see. Well, create a cloud service. Looks like at this point the virtual machine is being started most likely. Yep, it's running and it's provisioning it right now. But on the script, everything was completed. So you want to make sure that you do that. But as you can see, that's all there is to this script. We passed in all the information. The most important thing was the new Azure VM config. And it takes a lot of more configuration over here. So we'll go back to our slide real quick here, and I'll show you the new Azure VM config. This is straight from the MSDN, what other parameters it takes. So we have used the name, instance size, the image name. It can take some you can actually have labels for the operating disks and the OS disk. You can put it in the availability set, hosting cache label, media location. We're not going to go through all of this. Feel free to play with the script and add more stuff the way you want it, read over it from the MSDN, and that's all that there is to it. Of course, there are more information, like for example, when we put in the new Azure provisioning config can actually have more information here. This was a Windows standalone, so we did -Windows. It could be a Linux, it could be a domain machine, where you can put in the domain information, like which domain to join and how to join, the credentials for a domain admin to get in and join. So you could be creating this virtual machine already joined to a domain, and that all information would be going for the Azure provisioning config. This is where it will be done. You can create endpoints, and here what I was doing, I was creating an additional Azure data disk with the create new 20 gigs of disk with the disk level of data, and it was being pushed in here. Okay, so so this is all the configuration that you can do and pass into a virtual machine. So let this run, and I'm pretty sure the virtual machine is going to be up and running. There's not a whole lot I want to show you over here, except that endpoints part probably is created by now. As you can see, when we were creating these two would be there by default, but we also put the HTTP port 80, and it says the provisioning process is in progress, and you can change this configuration, so you can add or delete stuff from here. I just wanted to show the HTTP. I mean, you could obviously skip this step, but this is showing the power of the script or the PowerShell, where you can have everything made at one single point. So I'm going to come back once this virtual machine is created completely. I'll delete everything over here as well. Well, some of this stuff as well, and then I'll come back because I want to show you something after I do this. And creating the virtual machine, we have seen this like so many times by now, so that you're not missing anything over here. Okay, so once this is finished, I'll be back. Okay, looks like our VM is running at this point. So I'm going to delete everything except one thing right now. So I guess we are all clear over here how we create this virtual machine. I want to run this commandlet. What this commandlet does is we did this in UI, right? We created the virtual machine, then we added from the UI an additional data disk to the virtual machine. So the virtual machine can have a separate place for example, SQL data or Exchange data or SharePoint data. The way you do that is you get the virtual machine first. So it's get Azure VM, and this is the cloud service name, and this is the name of the VM. And what we will do is we'll add Azure data disk, and we will create a new data disk, and the disk size in gigabytes is 128. And we are going to label this disk, and this is going to be very important for us to label this disk. We're just going to call it main, or you know what, forget that. We are going to just call it my data, okay? And we're going to label the disk and put it in LUN 0, and we're going to update the Azure VM. I'll go over this a lot more when we do our Azure session for the storage. But here, I just want to show you every little thing that we did in a previous session, the UI. So this will be an additional data disk. And of course, you'll have to run the virtual machine, go and scan for the new storage, initialize it. You have to make sure you give a label, or you give a drive later to it, whatever you need, DE or whatever. But this is how you do it. So our virtual machine is already created. So let's do one thing. Let's go to the storage here. This is the storage we created, right? The storage account that we created over here, new storage account. So let's go in there, and we are going to go to the containers. We'll see that the Vhds container is already there. And this is where you can see the VHD. This is the OS VHD, right? So this is the operating system disk. When you create another data disk and attach to this virtual machine, we are going to use this, when we run this commandlet, it actually takes the default storage account. So you remember this thing? So it takes the default, by default, when you run this command, it always takes the default storage account. And what it will do is it's going to create in there. Means you are going to see another VHD that's going to show up in here, which is the additional data disk. So let's go ahead and run that. So I'm going to, the way you run that from the script, you need to highlight this, and rather than running the entire script with this, which is run the script, we are going to only run selection. Okay, so let's do this so I can see what's going on. And let's run the selection. So we are picking up the same cloud service, same VM, just adding the Azure disk and creating a new data disk over here. And we are going to label it as my data. Okay, so I'll be back once this disk is already created. Okay, it looks like the command's run over here. It says that it succeeded, update Azure VM. Let's go and see if it came back. So we have to refresh this. So let's get out of here and go back in there and VHDs, and we should see the new VHD. Okay, perfect. So this was the VHD for the OS, and this is the VHD, my data. As you can see that it went and put that label in there. And this is why the label was so important, because if you come back and you have, like, imagine you have 10 different data disks, or you have other VHDs, it's very hard to figure out which disk it is or which VHD it is. So the one that says my data right now is the VHD. This is actually quite important for our next script that we are going to run, where we are going to create a virtual machine which already has an existing operating system disk. So let's delete everything except the stuff that's there in storage. So when I delete this, I'm going to just go and do keep the attached disk. I do not want to delete the attached disks. So it's going to just delete the virtual machine, but it's going to leave behind all the data. or the VHDs that we saw in storage. And what we are going to do is use a script to pick up those VHDs and create a virtual machine. This can be interesting in a lot of times or a lot of situations. For example, like I explained in my previous video, is that you might have an on-premise VHD that you want to upload here. We have not gone through that. The next session is most likely going to be that. But what we will do is you will take an on-premise VHD and we'll move it here, and we are going to run it the entire process, then create a virtual machine from that VHD, right? The entire extension of your data center or migrating from your on-premise to your Azure cloud is actually something that comes off from here. You upload those VHDs and you make sure that everything is moved here, and next you know your on-prem VM is running on your cloud, on your Azure cloud account. So this is important. I mean, those are the important things that you'll most likely be doing. So the virtual machine is deleted. There's no more virtual machine. Let's delete the cloud service as well. It won't take too long to delete this. Okay. So let's dismiss everything. So right now there's nothing there except the Ranger Store 123 and of course the VHDs that are in there. So the next script, let's go to the next script, is create Azure VM with existing OS disk. This is similar again to our previous one, except that there's a lot lesser information that you need to put in this script. Why is that? Well, because your virtual machine OS disk is already there. It's already created. All the configuration is done. So there's not a whole lot you want to put in there except how the virtual machine itself is going to be. The disk has everything in there. So yeah, as the previous one, we'll create a cloud service. We'll have a size, it's medium. I'm putting the same name, except that this time I have something called as disk name. This is something I just tried earlier, but let's delete that. Disk name is basically name of the OS disk. So if you come to storage, go to the VHDs. These are the VHDs. Now you have to be very careful here, and I need to stress that a little bit. This name is not the same name as the name you see over here. In Azure, everything has a label, everything has a name. Even just this VHD has its own name. You'd think that this is the name of the VHD. I could pretty much copy and paste this and probably put this over here. Well, it's not going to work. And the way we do that, and I'll just show you in a moment here, is that you go to the PowerShell console here. Make sure that you're on the right subscription as always. Get Azure subscription. I want to make sure I'm in the right subscription. Okay, Ranger pay-as-you-go subscription. So this is my subscription name. You're going to see yours. There is a commandlet to see all the disks that you currently have in your store. And that commandlet is get Azure disk. Once you run this commandlet, you'll see that we have two disks. We have a disk here and a disk here. So the disk that we are looking for is the operating system disk, or this was the my data. We don't want this. We want this one. So how do you know what is the name of this disk? Well, the name of this disk is disk name. So here you can see that this is the VHD, the media link actually. I'll get to that later. That this is the disk name. The reason I know that this is the disk name is because I do not have any label here. This OS disk does not have any label here. The other hint is that it actually says OS Windows, means there is an OS on this disk. Okay, but like no label here. And with the data disk, you can see obviously the OS is missing. This is the name, but you can see the label. You remember the little label thing we did over here previously? Disk label my data. That's where it came. So it's easy to identify which disk name you need to pick up from here. As you can see, this is not the name. The name for this VHD OS disk is this one. Okay, you need that name. The other thing, you can see the source image, right? This was the source image. So when we did this guy here, get Azure VM image, it went and actually picked up this image, the latest image. Okay, Windows Server 2012/2, 2015, created in March sometime. That was the image. So there are ways to find out if this is an OS disk or not, but it will get super confusing when you have a lot more of disks over here or OS disks. So at that point, you need to start putting label, and those labels and everything will be at this location when you create the virtual machine itself. So you put a label over here, and that disk label, I think it was there on our state chip. Yeah. So there has to be a disk name, like you could have put your own name for the OS disk here, and you could have put a disk label for the operating system disk. So you can start putting in those parameters to ensure a more complete and robust for your production, because once you have a lot more here, it will get very confusing. But for our purpose, that's the disk name. So we'll take that disk name and we are going to put this here in this script. Okay, disk name. And here, this is similar to our previous one where we are telling that that storage account was going to be, so rather than, so I put the storage account name directly over here, Ranger Store 123, so it knows where to go and look. Now, we know the new Azure VM config, and this became very simple this time. All we are doing is giving the virtual machine name, the instance size, and we are putting nothing else except the disk name. We are saying that get the disk that is already existing in the storage account. So there's nothing more to configure, because the username, password, the endpoints and everything. I mean, you can put the endpoints here. I'm not putting the endpoints here because they will be part of the standard new Azure VM config. But most of the stuff is already there in the virtual machine. The provisioning config part is no longer required here. And the commandlet to create this is the same, new Azure VM, the cloud service name, location, and the -vms where you put the entire config. So this time, it's not going to take that long to create the virtual machine because everything is already done. The VHD is already there. Okay, so let's run this. Once again, I'm still waiting for this to happen. It's probably spinning up things in the back end. Let's go and see if we can see anything. Ranger Stories Online for virtual machine. Not yet. Maybe it needs a refreshing. I do not know. Let's refresh this. Come back here. Well, see, the command completed, so looks like everything succeeded. It's probably just running right now, trying to create or start the virtual machine. Okay, so the cloud service was being created. Virtual machines started showing up, and it is starting. So I'm not going to go through the entire process, but that's how you create a virtual machine using PowerShell with an existing OS disk. So the OS disk was already there, and I told you the reasons you might need to run this script to do all of this, because you might want to move something from on-premise, or you want to have a disk that you deploy something really quick from, and that's really it. And I want to see one more thing here. If I went to new from gallery, I want to see what it shows in my disk. I'm assuming that this is already picked up, so it's probably, yeah, there's no items here. So, but that's how you'd go and pick the disk, existing disk, if you are doing this in UI. If you want to know how that works, go to the previous session of part 2, and it's there. Okay, so I'll wait for this to complete, and I'll be back. Okay, it looks like the virtual machine was created, and that's about it. There's not a whole lot of information that I want to show you from here because this is pretty standard at this point. Okay, so I'm going to clean up my slate over here, and I will be right back with my next script. I just wanted to come back while I'm actually cleaning up my subscription from all the virtual machines. You remember the add Azure provisioning config here, and we were just doing the username and password. This was actually the script to create Azure VM from the images, the largest script, right? There are other stuff that you can do to the virtual machine, specific virtual machine, while it's being created. So you have other commandlets, like, stuff that you can do with add Azure provisioning config, the one over here, besides putting the username and password. You have things like reset password on first logon. So we know we are creating it with my easy peasy password here, but you can actually have more things in there which says that reset password on first logon. You can have more provisioning configs such as disable automatic updates. By default, when you create the virtual machine, it always has the automatic updates for auto download and install. For certain production, that might not be the right decision. Well, most of them, it might not be like right decision. So you want to maybe do disable automatic updates. So I just wanted to show you that as much as new Azure VM config can take a lot of parameters, there are other stuff that can go to the add Azure provisioning config as well. Okay, so I'm not going to create anything, but I just wanted to pass this along, saying that there is a lot more that can be done. And you can find everything about this commandlet on NSDN to see what else that can be put in there. Okay, so be right back. All right, so I just thought of something. I was trying to keep this video short, so I was thinking that I'll skip this, but that's actually very interesting because for me, when I try to create anything, I try to make it very precise and pristine, so it's very easy for me to look up something when it's in production. So what I'm just going to show you here is one more script, and I promise that'll be the last script. When we created the storage in our script, so we would come over here, for example, let's enlarge this one here. Okay. We'd create a storage account called Ranger Store 123. And that's what we have here, Ranger Store 123. When we go to the storage account and we go to the container, like I mentioned, this VHDs container or folder would already be created for us. And as you can see, this was the OS disk and this was the My Data disk, and we have them all here. And it's a random name. It comes with date and stuff and stuff over here, which is good. What if we could create a script which would actually store the virtual machines in a container that rather than VHDs, I will name it, for example, the name of my VHD and name of my virtual machine, and keep them all separate and nice. So I'm going to show you a script which will actually do that. So rather than in the container having VHDs, it will probably have the name of the virtual machine, maybe name of the virtual machine and VHDs. So it will make things a little bit more precise and pristine. So in production, it comes very handy. So let's look at that script. Okay, so this is a different script. So far, till this point, you'll see it's all the same, right? Cloud service name, virtual machine name, size, and the store name. I'm calling this a storage Ranger Storage 01, for example. What I'm going to do is two more things. The OS disk, I'm telling where the operating system disk is going to be. And you can see in storage, there is always the storage URL. So if you come to the storage over here, you can see that this is the URL where all the VHDs are located, right? It's the URL of the container. So I am saying rather than going to the VHDs or whatever, I'm actually going to specify the URL. So I'm going to say take the store name because this is the construct of the storage URLs. Don't worry about it too much yet. We'll have this in a different session. The construct is the storage name .blob.core.windows.net. So this is pretty much something you have to remember. I'm saying go and store this rather than in VHDs folder, name the container as the virtual machine name and call the disk as os.vhd, right? And the next one is similar, and I'm saying data.vhd. So rather than having this random name over here, how the VHD is stored, I'm going to have them actually stored in a little bit. So it's going to be called os.vhd or data.vhd and stuff like that. So it makes it a little bit cleaner, okay? So it's over here, everything else is the same. The only thing is when you create the configuration with the new Azure VM config, you can see that I am going to put the OS disk and the data disk with a parameter called media location. Okay, so before we did not do anything like that, but this time I'm telling the script or I'm telling the configuration where you're going to place the media or the location of the operating system as well as the data disk. Okay, so this script is actually going to create the data disk while the virtual machine is going to be created. And if you looked at the new Azure VM config, there was a parameter there called media location. So I'm using this one now. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time explaining how this script is running, but those are the only new things, the location and specified by media location. And this is very helpful in production. You want to keep things nice and clean and segregated, so it's easy to find out which virtual machine is located where. In one shot, you don't have to go into a lot of guessing, it won't be a guessing game. Okay, so I'm going to create the virtual machine and be right back. All right, so looks like the script has run. So let's go to the storage, and if everything worked out here, let's go to the containers. And look at the container this time. The container is not called VHDs anymore, but it's the same as the virtual machine name we have created. So let's go in there, and you can see the OS disk is now labeled as os.vhd, and the data disk is data.vhd. Obviously, you can understand how this is much cleaner, and if you had multiple virtual machines in our storage account, they all probably would have their own names here and stored separately. Okay, so it's a little bit of a vanity thing, but it might be very important for you in production to keep things together. And the way this is done is with the OS disk and the data disk. We're putting the URL here. This is the part where it's getting that name for the container. And we're using media location. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is this screen. I'm not going to go through the entire script, but this is actually taken directly from the scripts that were there when we are creating the network configuration or doing the VIP, DIP, and PIP, right? So in the VIP or the virtual IP, which is the IP of the cloud service, we just have a reserved IP name. As you can see, the new VM, this was the configuration, right? Now this will really make a lot of sense to you. You can see with the new Azure VM, all I did was take this reserved IP and put this in the new Azure VM cmdlet. So this was done while the script, when the virtual machine is run, it actually gets this information. For the DIP, and this is probably very important because this is probably how, this is how you set the static IP address to the virtual machine. You need the VNet name and the subnet name. And again, new Azure VM config, you can see we now are passing set Azure subnet and putting the subnet name. And this is the set Azure static VNet IP. This is the static IP address of the virtual machine, which would absolutely make sense because this is now going through the virtual machine configuration, and when new Azure VM calls that configuration at this location, that's the one, it's actually going to take the IP address and the subnet and it's going to put it through for the virtual machine. So it makes sense for it being part of the config cmdlet. With the PIP, this was the public IP address directly attached to the virtual machine. Here again, we need the VNet and the subnet, and you can see we are doing something similar here. We are taking the subnet and we are putting this over here. Set as your public IP address. This is actually the public IP of the virtual machine and not the cloud service or not the internal, but a public IP address attached directly to the virtual machine. And once again, it goes into the config variable using the new Azure VM config. So this is something I wanted to show you that if you go back to the scripts, it will now make more sense why they were there in these config locations, right? For the VIP, DIP, and PIP. I'm not going to go through the entire script to obviously do that. Okay, moving on. This is another thing. This is actually the life cycle of the virtual machine. So if you have a virtual machine and you want to stop it and you want to deallocate it, means you pretty much want to go here to the virtual machine and press, where is that? Shut down. Means you are going to stop and deallocate it, right? The status would be stop deallocated. The way you do that is with this cmdlet. Stop Azure VM, and if you stop it with the service name and the virtual machine name, it will stop it and deallocate it. Now, what happens if you go inside the virtual machine and turn it off? The way you do that is that the virtual machine will be stopped, but it will still have the allocation. Remember the holding the IP address and the resource thing? It will be similar, stop Azure VM, the service name and the virtual machine name, but it will stay provisioned. By stay provisioned switch, you're basically saying do not release the virtual machine resources. Okay, so it will be stopped and allocated. And this one is, I'm just saying that if you put the force over here, because this will actually ask you, if it's the last VM saying that, hey, we are going to get rid of the VIP or something. So if you're going to run this as part of a larger script where you don't want all these prompts, you do the dash force and it will stop the VM and deallocate it, but no prompt if it's the last VM. So if it's the last VM of the cloud service, it's not going to prompt it. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show you here with all the stopping the virtual machines with PowerShell cmdlet. Okay, the next thing I want to show you is how do you remove or delete the virtual machines from PowerShell. So this is very simple. It's remove Azure VM and you put the service name and it's good to go. What this remove will do is that it will remove it, but it will leave the drives behind. So this is almost clicking delete and keep the attached disks. That's what that cmdlet does. So remove Azure VM and directly. Now, if you wanted to actually delete the Vhds, you take the same cmdlet and do that dash delete VHD parameter, okay? And it will delete it. Obviously, when you delete it from here or you delete it from here, it leaves the cloud service behind. So you have to go to the cloud service and manually delete that. But since this is all about a virtual machine session, this is how you do that. Okay, so that's pretty much it when it comes to this session. I think I have covered most of the stuff at this stage with the virtual machines. There's not a whole lot to cover here after that, and I think I covered a little bit more than necessary for the exam, but this will definitely help you a lot in production. Okay, so it's under an hour, so that's pretty good. As usual, training site is at cloudranger.net/Azure-training. YouTube is Cloud Ranger Network, Twitter and Google+, and you can always email me, Sean@cloudranger.net. So thank you for viewing, and I will see you in the next session.